Hi everyone, Ceri Griffiths here, award-winning designer here at Katy, and I want to introduce you to the latest addition to the Creative Cake system. I've come up with the continuous basket mold, and this will do this, and it will do this. So it's good for either novelty or wedding, tradition, whatever you wish. Great texture mat as well if you just want to do pieces on tops of cake or you want to do bits on plaques. So let's take a closer look at this mold and see how we use it. So as you can see, it's actually a rectangular mold, so it means it can be used in any direction you wish to use it. This is probably the orientation I'd use for a side of a cake. If I was doing a drum cake or a taller cake, I could possibly do it this way. Now, it's worth pointing out, if you look at the corners of this mold, this one looks different to all of the other three. It isn't an error in the mold. It's what I put into the design so that you know it's a key point. I find, and I'll talk about this when I've unmolded it, when I unmold it, it will end up on the opposite side. And if I always make sure this individual piece here is in the top left-hand corner, I will always have my molded piece in the right orientation. However, if I do it in this direction, then obviously the reverse, because it would end up on this side. So just be aware, this is the thing to look out for. It's not an error in the mold. It's a key point that I put in there so that you've always got a single point of reference. So next thing is, the sugar paste I'm using in this mold is actually the adjusted sugar paste. For this, I've used sugar paste. I've used 1 kilo of sugar paste, and I've actually added 8 grams of Tylos or CMC powder. We do have a video on that. There will be a link below, but remember, each brand of Tylos has a different strength, and each brand of sugar paste also has a different strength. So that's a rough guide. 8 grams to 1,000 grams of sugar paste is approximately. Now, when it comes to how much I need for this mold, I've actually found out if you weigh out 150 grams exactly, that's enough to do this mold. So let's take the scale out of the way, move the mold to one center. Now, how do you prepare the mold? For me, I use a white vegetable fat. It's either Trex or Crisco, depends on what country you're working in. I'm using the tiniest bit just there to help anchor everything in. Because of the nature of a Katy Sue mold, it's going to release anyway. I just like to put this little bit of white vegetable fat in there so that it actually grips the paste while I'm working. I'm using a tiny, tiny amount. You shouldn't be able to see it in the finished mold when it's greased. So as you can see, it's in there, lots and lots of detail, lots of bit that will grip. I just like to have a little bit in there myself. Now, what's the first thing I do? Put the mold to one side. This piece of paste that I've got, the adjusted paste, I need to roll it out so it fits within the cavity of the mold. So I'm going to roll out on a bit of corn flour or cornstarch. I don't use icing sugar. Icing sugar would make something stick, whereas cornstarch or corn flour would make it release. So rolling out, trying to keep that rectangular shape, occasionally pull the corners out so we keep the orientation. Bring in the mold occasionally and go, almost there. Just, it's easier to roll it a little more than it is to try and shrink it back again. So you go, just keep rolling and rolling, trying to keep the pressure even. Let's have a look. I would say that's probably about right. So let's get rid of the rolling pin. Now, this is the top surface that I've been rolling, and this would be the best surface up against the mold. So I'm going to turn that over, and you'll see I've rolled it so it sits within the cavity. Now, what I want to do is make sure I just tease these corners out so they actually come to the edges. Come all the way as close as I can to the corners, because there shouldn't be any excess paste when we've finished this method of filling this mold. And I just want to make sure there's enough there. So as you can see, I'm not worried about these edges here and here. I'm going to come in with a bit of cornstarch or corn flour, and I'm going to press down directly and work my fingers upwards, 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 and then I'm going to turn the mold round and work upwards, upwards, upwards. This is actually going to encourage the paste to come all the way to the edges. I'm doing this to actually embed or anchor down the paste into the pattern of this mold. It'll help give it a grip. It will reduce any chance of having double impressions. So push that in all the way up. I'm using a reasonable pressure, but it is only finger pressure. I do not roll over the top with a rolling pin. You can, but you do danger of having a double impression because a rolling pin will push the paste along. Now, as you can see along the edges, I need to do a bit of work on these. I'll just use my fingertips to press the paste down to the very, very edges, concentrating on these pieces here to make sure that we're fully in the corners, working my way along, tidying up. I should be able to see the entire edge of the mould all the way around the mould. Again, make sure it's all in there. You're not going to harm it just by pushing that paste along. You've got enough depth of paste to be able to do that. There you go, working your way along. Now, there are some brands of sugar paste or fondant out there that can be used directly out of the packet. So if you have a brand that doesn't need tie loss, it'll work equally as well. Now, the very last thing I want to do is come in just to a little bit more corn flour on there, and using this part of my thumb, I'm going to press directly down just to make sure I've embedded this fully and that I haven't moved this around as I've been working. There you go. Now, I'm going to turn this around. This was that key point I told you about. Remember, the one that looks slightly different than the others? I like to start with that in the top right-hand corner. I then come along, make sure these edges are releasing quite nicely, and you'll see they do release. It's good quality silicone mold, will always release easily. I flip the entire mold over, and I will peel the mold back as if it was a page. I let the weight of the paste come out of the mold on its own. I don't try to force it and stretch it. Your mold is then done. These molds are really good. They can go in the dishwasher. So if you are worried about using white vegetable fat, you can always wash them, put them in the dishwasher. They'll be totally fine after that. And as you can see, we now have our molded piece. Now, my orientation is still in the top left-hand corner there. That's key to me. Now, when it comes to adding this to a cake, what I would do is just turn this one around. I would take my molded piece, and I like using a pizza wheel for this, but you could use a knife. This bottom edge along here, I like to cut off all of those little spikes to give myself a flat bottom on there. Your design may not require you to do it, but I tend to do that there. Then I'll turn it back so my orientation is correct. I'll then measure the depth of my cake. Now, my cake is actually a 4-inch cake, so I will come in and I will measure down 4 inches, and I will come along here and I will cut that section off, and that will give me my 4-inch piece that will stick directly onto the cake. There is another option. You could leave the entire height of the cake and border and let it stand tall, or you could roll the top over to give yourself a basket effect. So let me go ahead and show you how to attach these to the cake. As you can see, I've trimmed all my pieces. I do like to lay them end to end just to make sure I've got all of the joins correct before I put them on the cake. I also don't mind them sitting around a bit, because the longer they sit, the firmer they're going to get. They're not going to crack because this paste will not set completely firmly. This is just easier for me. So now I've got them all in order. I'm going to take my one piece and move it up, second piece, third piece, so that when I put them onto the cake, I know which order they're in. So let's take a look at the cake and start putting these on there. Now, with this cake, it's got a coating of buttercream, thin coating of buttercream. Then I put my sugar paste or fondant over the top of this, I would normally. I haven't done too thick of a coat because this mold is about 3 millimeters deep. Depends on where you actually measure it. If you'd have ganached your cake, you could have attached it directly to ganache should you wish. I haven't experimented about attaching it to buttercream, but it's not a heavy mold. If you've got a firm set buttercream at room temperature, it should work equally as well. In this instance, I'm actually going to use a bit of edible glue. I could use a little bit of moisture on it. I don't want to get the cake too wet. I just want it to be enough to actually adhere to. So I'm going to get my little pot and I'm going to get my brush, and I'm just going to prepare my cake and paint it on the surface. As I said, I don't want to make the cake too wet. I also don't paint all the way to the top or all the way to the bottom, because I paint all the way to the top, it could ooze upwards. Paint all the way to the bottom, the glue could ooze downwards should I actually press too hard. And once I've got the main majority of it on, I can actually come in and add a little more glue when it's in place. So I'm picking my mold up in the orientation it was. I'm turning mine around. Now remember guys, I'm doing this upside down and backwards. So hopefully you will be in a better situation than me. I've stuck this on. Now what I want to do is I'm going to come in from this end, just run my brush underneath there to make sure that's secure. And at this end, as you can see, it's peeling away. It's because by here isn't any glue. And I would find it easier to add it on afterwards than beforehand. So again, I'm going to run that brush up the edge just so it's nicely secured. Now, just for me to be able to see, I'm going to turn this around a second. Yep, it's sat quite nicely. If you do find that you've stretched it in some way, applying it to the cake, you can always manipulate the surface. So now I'm going to take my next piece. Now I know where this one starts, so I'm on a winner here. I'm going to come around and add that next bit of glue all the way around to where I judge the end to be. I'm then going to pick my piece up and put it onto the cake. Now, because the edible glue is there, I've got a bit of a slide. So let me just butt that up. Excuse me while I turn this around so I can see what I'm doing. There you go. That's nicely in place. Come along again. I haven't come all the way along with the glue. That's fine. And as you can see, this paste has been sat for a little bit of while, so it's not overly stretching. So I would just continue all the way around my cake, all the way to the end. Now, I'm not going to go all the way around this cake because I want to show you overhead how I would trim the extra piece of paste if it doesn't fit perfectly into the end. So let's go back to the overhead and I can talk you through the next part of the process. Now, there is no way I can tell you the exact measurement for every single cake because it will depend on the circumference, will be the thickness of your cake, how much you trimmed it, whether you've ganache, whether you've buttercream, how much you wrote. But you may be lucky and find that exact panels fit in. However, you will probably find there's going to be a stage where you need to trim this. It is quite easy. What I would do is don't put glue on the cake. Hold this panel up so that the one edge matches, hold it in place so you can work out where on here you need to trim it off. Then put it back onto a flat surface. Then I get a sharp knife. So let's call this the area I want to cut. What I do is I come in and I will cut down with my knife, following the edge of the molded piece, all the way down to the bottom. And once I've done that, I'll turn it and I'll trim it in the opposite direction. And all I'm doing is I'm recreating the other end. Sorry, you may not have seen that because I pushed it. I'm recreating that other end. So I'm going to come in and do that. One thing I would say when you do this method, make sure that you work out where this join is. So take that away. So when I add this back to my cake now, this edge definitely fits. This one, you might actually just need to do a bit of a stretch or a bit of a squeeze to fit it in, but that's the way you do it. And with every single cake, if you've got anything on a cake, the join should always be at the back of your cake. So it should be hidden should you get it wrong. If you find this isn't marrying up totally, what you need to do is go in and trim it one more time because it could be that this is the row that matches. It's an easy job, guys. There's enough stretch within it. So let's talk about now how I'd finish the top and bottom edges. Now, if you're someone that pipes, I could just go in and pipe a border around. As I said, let's look at the overhead again. If I had my paste here, let's do it as if it was this way, and this was the top edge of my mold. If I didn't want to cut it flush, I could just roll that top edge over on itself, and then I would have almost a basket effect around the top of the cake. That's what you'll get. So your side view would be that, and that means you wouldn't have the need to trim it off. You could just leave those spikes as a top edge, or you could do as I've done, which I've got a flat edge around there. I like to have a flat edge because it means I can add another element to it. Now, for me, the perfect mold for this is the Creative Cake System rope molds. There's rope borders, there's 3 here. There is actually a serrated version as well. By molding a strip of this, you could actually put it straight onto the piece. So if I take a little bit of this paste and give it a bit of a knead, I can show you what that looks like on a finished cake, both bottom and top. So again, I'll prepare my mold just by running a bit of that white vegetable fat down my mold, just to give me something to grip with. I roll this into a long sausage. Now, what I'm aiming to do is I want to create a sausage that will sit within this molded here, but I don't want it to overlap. So if I lay that in there, that for me is too wide. I need it to be able to sit completely down, because remember, I'm rolling a piece that's round and we need a piece that's half that. So just trim that little bit off again, there and there. Take it out of the way one more time. Now, once that's laying in the mold, as you can see, I can see daylight either side, or at least the mold either side. Take a little bit of cornstarch on my fingers. I work from one end, and with a rocking motion, I'm pushing this paste down into this mold all the way along to the end. Come back and tidy up the edges as you had to do with the other ones, all the way to the end. If you do have an area that is slightly raised, you goes too much, try and get something that doesn't have a sharp blade. Put your finger on, and you can always just slice a little bit of it away and then go back to that rocking action. Once you've done that, come in, open the mold up, and then peel it open like a book, and your piece will come out as a perfect rope all the way down to the very end. So let's put that to one side. Now, let's switch to the side view and see how this looks on a cake. So here we go, guys. We've got our cake, and this is our top edge. Now, you could leave it exactly as it is. It's a nice clean finish. If you've got flowers that are going to come over the top, there's no need to cover that up. The edge on the board is actually nice and clean, but this is what it would look like if I used the continuous rope borders around the bottom. That would give it a really nice basket type feel. If I use the same mold on the top, again, let me just lay that on there without gluing it. Again, I would have a really nice finish to my cake. So any of the molds, all of the stuff in the Creative Cake System will interwork with each other, and it's a nice way to finish it off. So here we are back and looking at our cakes. And as you can see, I've used it both on square and round. The round version here, I finished it off on the top. This isn't a piped shell border. This is actually the shell borders that are part of the continuous cake system. So as you can see, they work perfectly well there. I've actually made little fans because I was going for an oriental theme here. The little fans were actually made with the daffodil mold from Katy Sue. So that's another one. I just utilized a section of it. And as you can see, I've just put some orchids down. Quite a simple design, but very high on impact. When I looked at doing novelty, I actually did a square-sided cake, obviously wanted a cube, wanted to look like a wicker box. I put this on, I then airbrushed some colour over the top, and then wiped a little bit of off to give that distressed look to the wicker for it. You'll see on the corners, I could have worked a sharp corner, but to be honest, I found it far easier just to put a repeating pattern up the side. And I was trying to do an oriental look one more time because of our little friends, the pandas. So once again, I used that daffodil mold by Katy Sue and overlapped that fan effect all the way up the top. And I think you'll admit it looks pretty cool. I enjoy doing this cake. It was a lovely piece to do. So I hope you like the new continuous basket weave mold as much as I do. I really look forward to seeing what you guys can do with it. Do something special. Surprise me, guys. I'm looking forward to it. Bye-bye now.